Good afternoon. I'm David Light, the COO of AIVA, the American IV Association, and thank you all for joining. I am very, very fortunate. We're honored to have Katie Gillberg on with us today for today's podcast. Um, she is a super interesting and awesome person. She's the CEO and founder of Hydrate IV Bar out there based out of Denver, Colorado. They're also Hydrate is a founding member with AIVA, which means they're sort of in the inner circle, and Katie plays a very integral role in leading and communicating and guiding and participating in AIVA's movements as we go forward with our 2024 strategic plan. She also serves on the committees, and we're really happy to have her. So I want to kind of give you the opportunity, Katie, to go into a little bit more detail on that and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into this line of work and this business and what all that's about. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, David. That was quite the introduction, and I appreciate it. I'm, grateful for my time thus far as an AIVA founding member. I'm super impressed with the whole group and everyone that we've been able to collaborate and align with. So, thank you first and foremost. As David mentioned, I am the founder of Hydrate IV Bar. I founded our first location in Denver in 2016. And as a non-clinician, I have a business background, and this was really fueled as a passion project. I love the services for myself as a customer and wanted to create a brand, a wellness brand, and saw an opportunity specifically in Denver at the time. So in 2016, had no idea that I would have 4 corporate spas of my own, that we would begin franchising. I became a franchisor in 2020. So to date, we are in Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and Utah with 15 spas open. And
Awesome.
it's just, thank you, thank you, thank you. But it's just been unbelievable to see the industry grow, and it's grown so much in the last 7 years. But I truly believe we're still just scratching the surface. And as I mentioned, starting even 2 years ago, it felt very lonely in this space, and you have you know, compliance and regulation is, of course, of utmost importance. And just really grateful to see the industry collaborating, all these industry leaders collaborating with the best intentions forward, and organizations like AIVA. So here we are, 15 open and expanding nationally. And I'm just super fortunate. Compared to some of the other founding members who are pharmacists and doctors and nurses, and on the clinical side, the value that I bring on the business side is really focusing on operations, marketing, client experience, and marrying the two, because I feel like a lot of times the clinical aspect is the priority, should be the priority in all of these
Right,
spots.
right, right. Yeah.
And sometimes the communication to the non-clinical employees or the clients gets missed. And so really connecting those dots, because these services can be done in non-traditional medical settings, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that other corners should be cut. And so that's where I really feel like I bring value, is
Yeah.
helping bridge that gap.
Absolutely. Can you go back in time a little bit and kind of walk us through what were you doing before, you got into this space? Just at a high level, from a business background, and what was your experience like professionally? And then how did you make that switch? I mean, you kind of touched on it. You all of a sudden ended up with four, but that's a really big deal. I mean, especially for the person that's listening that wants to go to one, or has one and wants to go to two, or has two and
Sure.
wants to go to three, right? I mean, that's a big transition. So what was really the passion project that started that made you say, okay, it's time to take a risk and go out, on my own and chart this course?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So I have a business degree, started working in medical sales right after college. So that was my foot in the door in the medical space. I was primarily working in pain management,
Oh,
which
okay.
is different side of the spectrum
Yeah,
from
yeah, absolutely.
from
Very reactive at that point.
yeah, different than integrative medicine and
Right.
medicine. But I was working with private practices, hospitals. I was working with compounding pharmacies. Um, so understood a lot of just kind of how these systems were run. But most importantly, I was building relationships with fantastic medical professionals.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Okay.
and so I transferred to Las Vegas. I was living there and working with a hospital system for 2 years. And then was first introduced to IV therapy. I'm sure like 99% of us. Thank you, Revive. And and living in Vegas, I think I especially had a little bit of blinders on because I thought, this whole place is a little bit crazy and
Right.
crazy, and this is just for hangovers, and didn't think much more of it until I moved back to Denver. And one of my dear friends was struggling with uh, different therapies that she was on to help
Right.
with Lyme disease. And so she started seeing a functional medicine doctor and tried a Myers cocktail and was posting these pictures of infusions on her Facebook. And this is before Instagram was even as popular as it is
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And so that was the first time that I really thought, wow, like there's more to this. And um, I started, traveling across the country. I was traveling for work anyways, and I was in the compounding pharmacy world, and anti-aging became so much more, I just started seeing these buzzwords a lot.
Right.
And
Right.
then I was trying the services, and I just, in Denver at the time, I thought, I cannot believe, like, someone needs to be screaming these benefits from the rooftop. Like,
Yeah.
it's making
Yeah.
me feel amazing. And everyone I talk to just has never heard of this or doesn't understand that you can, get an IV, let alone one with vitamins. And, you're not in a hospital and you're not sick. Why are you choosing to do this? Why are you smiling in your photos? Like all of these, you know, kind of wows and mind shifts.
Right.
So that was really my why behind it. Is at first I thought, how can I do this and become as educated as possible and find um, a practice, a clinic, a spa that I can enjoy these services. And when I
Yeah.
found that there wasn't anyone or anywhere that was creating the same experience, accessibility, quality that I wanted, then I thought, well, I, I know amazing medical professionals. I think I can run the business.
Right.
Let's marry these two. And it's just an idea I couldn't shake, and I ran with it.
So when you when you made that decision, that's awesome. So when you made the decision, and we'll focus a little bit more on that piece, the new entrepreneur, maybe the non-clinical entrepreneur, but it's to me it's the same. I'm a licensed clinician by trade, a doctor of physical therapy, and I went into private practice, and any type of professional experience I really had before that didn't matter because I didn't have any real experience in business, especially my own business as an entrepreneur. So I think the questions I'm going to ask you next really apply to both. It just applies to somebody taking that first step. What was your mindset like having the business background and the good experience? What did you look for in like your first location and the relationships you built with people, and how did you tie all that in? Even go, if you want to, as much into, without being super specific, but did you need capital? How did you get that? Did you need a certain license in Denver? And can you talk about sort of the intricacies there? Because you sort of just sound like you said, I'm doing it, and you
When I
jumped,
say it, it
right?
makes it seem so easy. It's
Yeah,
not
and I know
easy, I
it's not because
promise.
I've
And
done
some
it
days I
too,
still
but
think, what am
right.
I doing? But no,
But what did
yes,
that first step look like? Yeah.
yeah.
How
So
big how
first,
big was your first place? Like, I mean, was it 1,000 square feet? Was it 500? Was it mobile? Those types of specifics.
sure. Um, you know, I I also recognize that because I talk to other entrepreneurs about this, and I talk to other people who want to start a business, and they have an amazing idea. It's probably a better idea than I've even had, but they just don't do it. And so
Yeah.
I mean, people always say, I had so many people say, this is crazy. I mean, including my parents. My parents were like, "What are you doing? You have a good job. You like, I mean, it was just, and so internally, I had this like fire inside of me, and I knew that I would kick myself more if I never tried than if I
Yeah.
tried and
Yeah.
failed. And I
Right.
also recognized that, I was in my late 20s. I didn't have children. I didn't have mortgage. I didn't have, like, I could afford to take a lot bigger risks
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
I probably, even could today. So all of those things really matter. I think people need to make smart, educated decisions. Ultimately, you have to have the capital to support it. Um, my business plan at the time was, I know I need to build, a team that is, I know I need to build the medical team. And, what I would recommend, legal, accounting, do not cut corners. You need to make
Right.
sure
Right.
you're protected at every cost. And it's very expensive to do so. But if you're going into business for the first time, the amount of legal, I mean, that was majority of the capital was going into legal, probably more so than even construction,
Oh,
because
wow.
we had to understand who can own this, what is CPOM, what do our, licenses look like, what do our, I mean, everything. We started from scratch.
Okay.
And so first it was building the medical team to support this business,
Right.
and then, having a good bookkeeper that was going to help keep the money flowing. And for me, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but I self-funded,
Yeah.
and so I was limited very much with the capital, but
Right.
I was in a position where I kept my job at the time, so
Yeah.
I was working in medical sales. I was on a nice salary. I'm sure my former employer doesn't love this story, but that's how I made it work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I worked the front desk 7 days a week, and I thought that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I was really excited for that. And obviously not sustainable, but
Right.
that's what I was willing to do to
Yeah.
kind of make all this happen and keep our overhead really low. Um, and we just, because have focused so much on culture and experience from the beginning, the people that we hire, I mean, the nurse can make or break an experience.
Oh,
And
totally. Yeah.
going back to even our space, I mean, I wanted a high exposure street where people were gonna, I wanted the drive traffic to be super high so people saw our sign, and it was accessible, and we had easy parking. People could come in and out and get an injection, and we weren't on the seventh floor of a medical plaza.
Right. Right.
All
Right.
we kind of, we changed even our build out. It's all open concept, and people thought, that's crazy. No one's going to want to get an IV and have eyes on them. And so
Yeah.
I feel like I had to have thick skin to kind of stay true to what I felt was right in my gut, knowing that I mean, it was a big risk. It could have totally gone the other way, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it worked, and we've just stuck by that. And so it's, then it started snowballing.
What was your thank? Yeah, that's amazing. What was so a couple more specific questions. Like what was so you picked a space. What was your original location square footage wise, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it's only 900 square feet,
Okay. Okay.
have 9 chairs.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things now, like now with our builds, so with that space, we ended up extending into the parking lot so that we could build more
Oh,
storage, so that we could expand our nurses station. I mean, things like that just we didn't realize, we
yeah.
needed at the beginning. At first, the priority was, how many chairs can we fit in here? We
Right.
need
Right. Right.
we
Yeah.
need butts and
Do
seats.
well. We also got to make sure the roof doesn't leak, the AC works, so you can see us. We're ground floor, and how many chairs can we get in? Right.
But really, still, I mean, 1,200 square feet is about our sweet spot right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was going to get to that. Like what's the range? And it seems to be, in that 1100 to 1500, depending on what types of other ancillary services are being offered as well.
And
Hmm.
for us, even, we don't, our lobbies are very small. Like it's
Yeah.
not somewhere where we have
Yeah.
people hanging out. We get people
Right.
checked in and back into a seat as fast as possible. So
Yeah.
uh, just little, little details like that.
It's amazing. We've had some similarities sort of in professional life outside of IV therapy, right? And when you go in and out of a lot of these physician offices, it's amazing to see the size of the lobby compared to the actual size of the treatment rooms, because the large majority of the times the patients are just sitting out there for sometimes hours on end
Right.
before they get in for 4 or 5 minutes. And in this world, it's completely opposite. It's they come in and they need to be in the treatment room for 30
Yeah.
to 30 minutes to an hour, or an hour and a half. But they shouldn't spend any time in the lobby. It's if they're scheduled right. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. From a startup perspective, and I know everybody's going to be different and super, super unique, whether it's self-funded or you work the front desk or you had your mom work it, or your friend was the medical director for the first 6 months. But and not asking any secret sauce questions, right? What is a typical, if it's done right, like ramp up model look like? Like where do you start to see a break even take place? Is it, and you can give me time frames. You don't have to be specific. Is it 6 to 9 months? Is it 9 to 12 months? Is it 3 to 6 months? Or is it past a year or something like that? Like what do
Yeah.
you look at from a performer perspective, business wise, before it's self-supportive?
Sure. And I mean, I'm so happy to share this information, be transparent. And if you're not familiar, or anyone that's listening not familiar with franchising, a lot of this information is disclosed in franchise disclosure documents. And I think it's super important because you need to understand how much can this potentially cost me to start, and
Right, right, right.
how fast can I make my money back? And, sky's the limit after there. So, we give ranges.
Yeah,
Obviously, rent in Omaha is likely going to be a lot different than rent in Manhattan.
right,
That's
right,
one
right.
area where, I tell our prospective franchisees, do not kill yourself on your fixed expenses. Like,
Yeah,
I highly, site selection is so important. You need to be visible, you need to be accessible. You need to be looking at, the demographics that can support these appointments. But if you go into business and your fixed overhead is already so unrealistic, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So, um, opening my first one, I was much more scrappy than opening my fourth one.
right, right,
Uh,
right.
the first one, well, really all four of mine, my mother's an interior designer. My family was painting. We were doing we did a lot of it on our own.
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal is that, I want all of our spas, including our franchise locations, to be profitable in a year.
Okay.
And everyone's break even varies.
Sure.
And then we kind of, pull back layers from there and kind of set realistic metrics. Something that we're focusing more is pre-sales and providing services prior to opening. And that's
Oh,
something
okay.
that, in this space, it's very unique versus other businesses, is we do have the opportunity to go off-site. And what I see a lot of times is these businesses will be held up in construction for 6 months,
Right, right.
not doing anything to generate revenue. So that's something that I would really,
Yeah.
encourage, is be out in your community, spread your brand, build those partnerships. You can still generate revenue even before you open your doors.
Yeah.
You're going to set yourself up for success so much better.
Absolutely. That's a that's really good advice. I think, too, if either, and this applies to both, if either a franchisee or a independent entrepreneur, right, not associated with a franchisor, is going to do that and take it one step further, they're a clinician, a licensed clinician that can provide these services. And I guess one more thing, they have the oversight structure and everything administratively in place. To your point, it can be a very, and it usually is, successful, let's call it a side hustle, while
Yep.
you're waiting for, the contractor to show up and the right sink to get in included and the right inspection to take place and the CO. And then also the original, the initial ramp up of just, hey, we're open now.
Right.
Never on day one, unless it's
Never
like
on time, never on budget.
unless it's an In-N-Out burger, which I've seen, promoted massively, which I have no idea why, but because I don't think they're that good. But you find a line like, 2 miles long for
Yep.
In-N-Out burgers, but we're not doing In-N-Out burgers. Does it crank on day one? So you've got to have and allow for some sort of a ramp up time
Yeah.
in order to do that. And I think one thing too, I'll interject that I've talked to different owners like yourself and franchisors or larger corporations is you have to be very, very aware too. You hit on the fixed costs just as much so. You've got, personnel costs are typically in the variable department, right? But you've got to be real aware you don't overhire too early
Mm.
and burn through whatever cash you have because nothing well, there's a few things, but one of the most unsettling feelings I had as an entrepreneur going into private practice was at the end of the month when I'd watch everybody get paid and we weren't that busy yet, except myself. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm working the hardest, I've been here the most, and I've
Hmm.
got way too many people on staff. And usually you don't realize that until you have that moment like, oh my gosh,
Right.
why don't I have enough money to pay myself? So you want to be really aware of that. So where I'm going with this is, not being everything to everybody, like open 24/7,
Yep.
but being strategically open and strategically aligning staff with that. So you're on the prime hours that you've identified, but you're not, 10, 12 hours a day every day makes a really, really important impact on the income statement at the end of the month as well.
Absolutely. And that's going to vary for everyone, right? I mean, I, the first few years, I mean, I never took a dollar out of the business. And I guess some people need to be, you just need to be realistic with your own cash flow ahead of time.
Right.
Can't
Mm-hmm.
afford to
Yep.
put the money into the business. It wasn't really my necessarily like strategy at the time, but this is just how it worked for us is
Yeah.
for corporate, I waited to open a second spa until my previous spa could fund it. So
Yeah.
I waited
Yeah.
until it
Makes
was
sense.
profitable and then I put that money into a second one. And then once the second one was profitable, then I dumped it into the third. And then, that is just what worked for me.
Right.
Um, it's, potentially slower growth, but also, it was you have to see, how risk averse you are. Um, yeah, and other, I think with this business, in my experience, and this goes back to kind of the pre-sales and kind of community outreaches, I cannot stress enough how important it is to build relationships. This is a personal services business, and
Yeah.
it takes a lot for you to earn someone's trust. I mean, they need to like, know, and trust you. And so the expectation in my experience of some of our owners that might say, I'm going to put a sign out front and construction's done. I'm going to open the door and people are just going to come. Uh, if
That's not
they
going to
do
happen.
come,
Yeah.
but I don't think that's very
Right.
realistic. There's a lot of education that needs to take place and building that reputation. And I mean, still 7 years later, word of mouth, personal referrals are by far our number one marketing driving source. And we put a lot of money into marketing. And so, and then also online. I mean, online reviews are so important. And this again goes back to just word of mouth and how personal this business is, in my opinion. So really making sure that, especially out of the gates, you're paying attention to your brand image, the people that you hire and how they're
Yeah.
representing your brand,
Yeah.
um, how you show up online, how you show up in the community is all so important. And of course, what you're doing inside your four walls.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah. You almost have to say that's a given, but it's
yeah,
not. I mean, if you've got a front desk or somebody that's taking your intake on the phone and they're not getting it done, meaning they're not personable, they're not engaging, they're not encouraging, and some people that call don't know what they're getting into. They're just like, let me give this a try. That's a big obstacle to overcome. And
yeah.
it's hard to see sometimes when you're not calling in or doing test calls or whatever. Yeah.
And I also think, I don't ever want kind of the what's the word I'm looking for, but just when always tell like our non-clinical team, our spa coordinators, or even myself, it's always appropriate if you get a question that is, medical and needs to go to our medical team, do not try and answer that yourself. It is
Right,
absolutely
right. Yeah.
say, I'm not our nurse. Let me,
Yeah.
rather than trying to
Yeah.
use your best judgment, or certainly do not guess.
Yeah.
And that's something
Right.
that we see sometimes as well is stay in your lane. I know that I'm not a clinician, and when appropriate, the medical
Yeah.
team needs to,
Yeah.
we work hand in hand together. So
Hours of operation, location, landmarks,
yeah.
directions,
Yep.
logistics.
Yep.
Talk about be positive about everything else and the experience. Yeah, but clinical questions, no. Even if you think you know the answer, nope, don't answer them. So cool. Well, I think that was we're pushing up on our time. I think that was really informative. Especially, and that's what we talked about. When we were starting this call, is we really wanted to gear this more towards the non-clinician and/or the clinician with no business experience going into the world of being an entrepreneur and taking that step. And we've both been through it. It's exhilarating, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's terrifying.
Yep.
And then it can be exhilarating the next day, and terrifying and stressful. And it's all those things wrapped in. And that's why, statistics show the large majority of small businesses across the board, regardless of service delivery line and specialization, don't do well. However, there are some everybody's path's different, but there are some tried and true measures that you followed to get to where you were. I followed to get to where I was, and a lot of the other people. And that's why the franchise is very alluring, I think, to people, is you guys can template that out. However, there's people that can chart that course on their own too. So this was informative, I think, in both categories. As we
Yeah.
wrap up, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I would just, I'm always in support and encouragement of entrepreneurs. And if you have that itch, and it's something that you're passionate about, lean on that and know that you don't have to go at it alone. There are organizations like AIVA. Lean on other people. You do not need to recreate the wheel. You can
Right.
still add in your special sauce and have your, special touches, but just lean on each other. And I'm always in favor of just do it.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And that's a good point. We kind of glossed over that. I guess now that I think about it, we talked a lot about business, 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 and we mentioned here and there some clinical oversight, but we obviously don't. We're not talking about opening a hot dog stand. That has regulations too. I mean, you're going to have some sort of an inspection to some degree and some sort of an occupational license. It's still food stuff, but it's just a hot dog stand. We're talking about healthcare services and clinical delivery. So, you're right. I think anyone and anyone that's in business or needs to get some different advice. That's what the American IV Association is for. It's at the very least a launch point to say, hey, even if we don't provide maybe the specific answers that are relative to you in Boise, Idaho, or South Dakota, or wherever, okay, we can help get you where you need to be, and also help get some guide rails up on how you need to practice. So it's very helpful. But it's a pleasure having you on. It was a great conversation. Felt like it went by in about 5 minutes, but
I
I
appreciate it. Thank
figured it would. Yeah. And thanks for doing what you're doing, and we wish you the best of luck for sure.
you. Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.